Hey, check it out. Back it up. Yeah. Drop it down. Make it shake. Ow! History, 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 history.
Picture this. A man walks into a city, loses a fortune, and decides the most reasonable course of action is to declare himself the ruler of an entire nation. No army, no election, no royal bloodline. Just confidence. And somehow, instead of being laughed out of town, people began saluting him. Businesses honor his authority. Newspapers print his proclamations. Government officials tolerate his existence. Some even treat him like a celebrity. Was he a genius? A madman? A visionary decades ahead of his time? Or was he simply the right kind of eccentric in the right place at exactly the right moment? Today, on What You Didn't Hear, we're taking a deep dive into the extraordinary true story of a man who rewrote the rules of society without changing a single law. A man whose imaginary kingdom became surprisingly real. So straighten your ceremonial robes, prepare your most official-looking nonsense documents, and join us as we uncover one of the strangest figures in American history, because this story is absolutely ridiculous and ridiculously true. A farmer and his wife. An unassuming and humble couple from Deptford, England, had no idea that in the early portion of 1818 they would give birth to an empire. A son who would lead a nation through its darkest hours and carve their family name into history. John and Sarah Norton lived in a small Kentish town in England that is today a part of the Greater London area. When their son was barely 2 years old, John and Sarah were approved to join a settlers' expedition, and they packed up their lives and moved to Algoa Bay of South Africa. There, they raised their son in Grahamstown until he was 19, when he struck out on his own to Port Elizabeth and went into business with his brother-in-law. Sadly, after only 18 months, the business had failed, and Joshua, the son of John and Sarah, took a job as an auctioneer in Port Elizabeth. After a year working in Port Elizabeth, Joshua Norton moved to Cape Town and joined his father's business, selling supplies and equipment for ships and their sailors. However, the young and aspiring Nortonson knew that he was destined for greater things. In 1845, at 27 years old, Joshua Norton departed from Cape Town and arrived in Boston, Massachusetts in March 12th of 1846.
High road, boatman, roll, float down river the Ohio. High road, boatman, roll, float down river the Ohio. The boatmen dance, the boatmen sing, the boatman up to everything. When the boatman gets on shore, he spends his cash and it works for more than dance.
But what was happening in the United States in 1846? 1846 was a busy year for this young and aspiring country. It was the height of the Manifest Destiny, a phrase coined by journalist and editor John L. O'Sullivan. His political commentary advocated for the annexation of Texas and expanding westward across North America. Westward expansion was exploding as families uprooted and packed what little they could carry with them and headed across the Great Plains. battling harsh summers and murderous winters, all in the name of opportunity. In February, Brigham Young led thousands of his followers on a massive westward exodus from Nauvoo, Illinois. They sought a new home for their growing community and eventually settled in the Great Salt Lake Valley. In May of 1846, driven by border disputes following the 1845 annexation of Texas, Congress declared war on Mexico. U.S. victories in the Mexican-American War would secure half of Mexico's territory, known today as the states of Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and California. In June, Great Britain signed the Oregon Treaty, peacefully setting the boundary between Canada and the U.S. at the 49th parallel, securing the Oregon Territory for the United States. This region today includes Washington, Oregon, Idaho, the western part of Montana, and the western part of Wyoming. On the day prior to the signing of the Oregon Treaty, a group of American settlers in Sonoma, California, rebelled against the Mexican authorities and proclaimed the short-lived California Republic in an event known as the California Bear Flag Revolt. By July, U.S. forces formally claimed the region for the United States. In August, President James Polk signed the Smithsonian Institution Act into law, creating the world's largest museum, education, and research complex. And for one more final historic event in such a lively year, in the winter of 1846, a family moving westward across the Sierra Nevada were trapped in an early blizzard at what is now named Donner Pass and Donner Lake, named for the Donner Party tragedy. I have a whole deep dive episode dedicated to this very event, and it is one of the stories that inspired me to start this podcast. It's easy to see what an eventful and important year it was for the United States, but no one suspected that someone of great authority and status would arrive unannounced in March of 1846 and go on to rule over this rapidly expanding nation. In late 1849, Joshua Norton moved across the U.S. to San Francisco, California. Where he was between 1846 and 1849 is shrouded in mystery. It is a dark chunk of his history that is believed to have been spent in South America, more specifically, Brazil. According to Joshua Norton's personal account, he sailed from Rio de Janeiro to San Francisco. When he arrived in San Francisco, it was at the peak of the California gold rush. The small outpost of San Francisco had exploded overnight from about 800 residents to 25,000 residents, as people from all over the United States and the rest of the world swarmed into the primary gateway of the California interior. These fortune seekers were known as the 49ers, as a mark of the year that the gold rush really took off. But Joshua Norton was one of the entrepreneurs that sought fortune from the booming economy created by the gold rush. He started his business endeavors in San Francisco as a commodity trader, selling imported goods. Eventually, Norton built himself a rice cleaning mill and entered the world of rice business. In addition to his commodity and rice businesses, Norton dabbled in real estate, erecting buildings in San Francisco's waterfront districts. However, in 1852, there was a famine in China, and Norton saw a risky opportunity to corner the rice market. He purchased a massive shipment of Peruvian rice, expecting prices to skyrocket, and returned his investment with plenty of room to spare. Unexpected shipments arrived shortly after his purchase, and the rice market quickly crashed as supply overwhelmed demand. Joshua Norton's business empire collapsed in December of 1852. After a lengthy contract dispute in the California Supreme Court and loss of business clients, Norton declared bankruptcy in 1856. In September of 1857, he served on a jury for a case of a man accused of stealing a bar of gold from Wells Fargo, and in 1858, he announced his candidacy for U.S. Congress. This also was not successful for Joshua Norton, and after losing the election in 1859, he had become completely unsatisfied with what he considered to be inadequacies of the political and legal structures within the United States. September 17th, 1859, marks the most remarkable and audacious day in Joshua Norton's life. With nothing left to lose and everything still to gain, Joshua Norton delivered the following letter to the San Francisco Bulletin. At the premonitory request and desire of a large majority of the citizens of these United States, I, Joshua Norton, formerly of Algoa Bay, Cape of Good Hope, and now for the last 9 years and 10 months past of San Francisco, California, declare and proclaim myself Emperor of these United States. And in virtue of the authority thereby in me vested, do hereby order and direct the representatives of the different states of the Union to assemble in Musical Hall of this city, on the first day of February next, then and there to make such alterations in the existing laws of the Union as may ameliorate the evils under which the country is laboring, and thereby cause confidence to exist, both at home and abroad, in our stability and integrity. Signed, Norton I, Emperor of the United States. The paper printed the letter that same evening and kicked off the 20-year reign of Norton I, Emperor of the United States. A month into his reign, Emperor Norton had issued numerous decrees through local newsprints, which included a decree on October 12th to formally abolish the United States Congress. In early 1860, Emperor Norton I summoned the army to depose of the elected officials of the U.S. Congress with the following decree. Whereas a body of men calling themselves the National Congress are now in session in Washington City, in violation of our imperial edict of the 12th of October last, declaring the said Congress abolished. Whereas it is necessary for the repose of our empire that the said decree should be strictly complied with. Now, therefore, we do hereby order and direct Major General Scott, the Commander-in-Chief of our armies, immediately upon receipt of this our decree, to proceed with a suitable force and clear the halls of Congress.
Green grow the lilacs all sparkling with dew. I'm lonely, my darling, since parting with you.
Major General Winfield Scott was the longest-serving general in the United States history and was a legendary military commander. He served under 14 U.S. presidents from Thomas Jefferson to Abraham Lincoln and was a pivotal hero in the War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War. He was known as Old Fuss and Feathers for his meticulous attention to discipline and proper military dress. His command was responsible for the 1847 capture of Mexico City. It was his Anaconda Plan that directed the Union to split the Southern Confederacy in two at the Mississippi River, and a naval blockade to strangle supply lines, leading the Union to its ultimate victory in the U.S. Civil War.
The green lilacs to the red, white, and blue.
Though he was too sick to lead the campaign in the field, generals like Ulysses S. Grant and William Sherman played General Scott's plan out to its successful stranglehold over the Confederacy. Despite his military and political prowess, Major General Winfield Scott chose to ignore the emperor's command to march on the District of Columbia and remove Congress from office. There was never any official response, and it's safe to assume that if Emperor Norton's decree ever reached the desk of Winfield Scott, it was promptly cast into the nearest wastebasket.
I'm lonely, my darling, since parting with you. But by our next meeting I hope to prove true and change the green lilacs to the red, white, and blue.
This, however, did not thwart Emperor Norton's inevitability. In July of 1860, Norton I ordered the dissolution of the Republic in favor of a temporary monarchy led by him. In 1862, Emperor Norton issued a mandate that both the Catholic and Protestant churches would publicly and officially ordain him as Emperor of the United States, so that he may resolve the many disputes caused by the Civil War. This mandate was ignored by the church's highest authorities in an act of direct obstinance. Emperor Norton I spent the tenure of his reign building foreign relations and commenting on the policies and actions of governments abroad. He even issued proclamations directed at foreign leaders in attempts to establish relations with them and influence more favorable behavior. In 1861, as a response to the instability in Mexico, Emperor Norton annexed Mexico and formed the Empire of the United States and Mexico. But in 1864, Napoleon III installed Maximilian I as his puppet ruler in Mexico. Emperor Norton ceased referring to himself as the Emperor of the U.S. and Mexico, and instead shifted his title to Protector of Mexico. And he maintained this title for the remainder of his reign. Relations between the United Kingdom and the Empire of the United States were also on the table. Norton I wrote many letters to Queen Victoria urging her to marry him to strengthen ties between their nations. It became obvious much later that Queen Victoria had no interest in improving the bond across the pond, because she never responded to any of Emperor Norton's letters. The Emperor of the United States also sent letters to Kamehameha V, King of the Hawaiian Islands, regarding his interest in an estate in Hawaii, so he could come visit the island nation to discuss further relations. While there are many rumors and myths that King Kamehameha accepted this request and recognized Emperor Norton over the U.S. government, none of this is in any way confirmable. Norton also did not tolerate any disrespect toward the city he called home. Sometime in 1872, Emperor Norton issued a stern edict stating, "Whoever, after due and proper warning, shall be heard to utter the abominable word Frisco, which has no linguistic or other warrant, shall be deemed guilty of a high misdemeanor, and shall pay into the imperial treasury as a penalty the sum of $25. Additionally, Emperor Norton took on the role of dictating the improvement of infrastructure in the San Francisco area by decreeing that a bridge be built to connect Oakland to San Francisco. Though not immediately, his order was followed with the construction of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge and the Trans-Bay Tube. There are ongoing efforts to rename the Bay Bridge Emperor Norton Bridge in honor of the late Emperor of the United States. Emperor Norton spent most of his days walking the streets of San Francisco, paying visits to newspaper offices to deliver his latest decrees, and in the evenings he was often spotted wearing his elaborate blue military-style uniform at political gatherings and theatrical or musical performances. He would witness the state of things such as sidewalks and cable cars, or the appearance of police officers, and discuss these pressing issues with the people he encountered while walking among his subjects. Norton I also had his own currency printed in the form of promissory notes. They came in the form of 50 cents to $10. Emperor Norton's personal currency was accepted by some restaurants in the San Francisco area when he would visit their establishments. In 1867, Emperor Norton was arrested in the streets by a special police force officer by the name of Armand Barbier. Officer Barbier stated that Emperor Norton should be committed to a mental institution. The arrest sparked outrage in citizens around San Francisco. The Daily Alta wrote an editorial regarding the arrest, stating, "He had shed no blood, robbed no one, and despoiled no country, which is more than can be said of his fellows in that line." When the word of his arrest and the voices of the public reached the police chief Patrick Crowley, he immediately ordered the release of Emperor Norton and issued a formal apology on the behalf of the San Francisco police force. In his gracious manner, Emperor Norton gave Officer Barbier an imperial pardon. After this incident, the police officers of San Francisco saluted Emperor Norton as he passed in the streets. In 1870, Joshua Norton was officially recognized as emperor in the U.S. Census. He was recorded as Joshua Norton, 50 years old, residing at 624 Commercial Street, with his occupation listed as emperor. It was also noted in the census report that he was insane. On the evening of January 8th, 1880, Emperor Norton collapsed on the corner of California Street and DuPont Street, across from the St. Mary's Cathedral, while he was making his way to a debate at the California Academy of Sciences. A police officer witnessed his collapse and immediately responded, sending for a carriage to bring Emperor Norton to the hospital. Sadly, before the carriage arrived, Joshua Norton had passed away. A local newspaper printed the announcement of his passing with the following report. On the reeking pavement, in the darkness of a moonless night, under the dripping rain, Norton I, by the grace of God, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, departed this life. Rumors had spread across San Francisco that Norton was not only secretly very wealthy, but also that he was the illegitimate child of Napoleon III. But for this to be true, Napoleon III would have had to have conceived Joshua Norton when he was only 11 years old, so it's not likely. However, after his passing, it became undeniable that Emperor Norton had been living in poverty for a long time. On his person, they found $5 in small change, and in his apartment, only a small gold piece worth $2.50. Other than this, the emperor's estate amounted to a small collection of walking sticks, his royal saber, a variety of headgear, and some forged letters from Tsar Alexander II of Russia, congratulating Norton on his upcoming marriage to Queen Victoria. Due to his lack of wealth or any family to provide a funeral fit for an emperor, it was arranged for Norton to be buried in a pauper's coffin. However, his subjects rejected this idea, and the San Francisco Businessmen's Association raised a funeral fund that provided a nice rosewood casket and arranged for a dignified farewell. Emperor Norton's funeral was held on Saturday, January 10th, and brought an estimated 10,000 people who came to watch and pay their respects as the body was transported to his burial site. The San Francisco Chronicle reported, "All classes from capitalists to pauper, the clergyman to the pickpocket, well-dressed ladies and those who garb and bearing hinted of the social outcast." Emperor Norton was buried in the Masonic Cemetery, and in 1934 his remains were transferred to a gravesite at the Woodlawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Colma, California. His gravestone reads, "Norton I, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, Joshua A. Norton, 1819 to 1880. And so ended the reign of Emperor Norton I, a man with no throne, no army, no treasury, and no legal authority whatsoever. Yet somehow he commanded respect. Congress ignored him, generals ignored him, queens ignored him, but the people of San Francisco did not. They accepted his currency, they laughed at his decrees, they listened to his speeches, they saluted him in the street, and when he died, thousands came to mourn him. Maybe that's because Emperor Norton was never really trying to rule a nation. Maybe he was holding up a mirror to one. In an era defined by political division, war, corruption, and rapid change, Joshua Norton offered something unusual. A shared joke that everyone could be a part of. A reminder that not every problem needed anger, and not every authority needed a title. After all, if enough people decide you're the emperor, who's really going to argue? More than 140 years after his death, Norton remains one of the most beloved figures in American history, proving that sometimes the most influential people are the ones who never held office at all. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the life, legend, and empire of Norton I, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. And remember, history isn't just shaped by presidents, generals, and kings. Sometimes it's shaped by a bankrupt businessman with a sword, a fancy hat, and an absolutely unreasonable amount of confidence. I'm Zane Gould, and this has been What You Didn't Hear. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep listening for the stories you didn't hear.
Hey.